The cafe on the corner of a busy Chicago street hummed with quiet conversations, the soft clatter of cups, and the faint sound of jazz playing in the background. It was late afternoon, the kind of time when the rush had faded, but the evening crowd had yet to arrive. A single father sat near the window with his young daughter, her small hands busy coloring on a sheet of paper while he sipped a modest cup of coffee. His clothes were clean but worn, his posture slightly tired, yet there was a calm strength in the way he watched over her. Every now and then he leaned closer to admire her drawing, offering a gentle smile that made her beam with pride. The door opened and a woman stepped in, instantly drawing a few subtle glances. She carried herself with quiet confidence, dressed in understated elegance that spoke of wealth without needing to announce it. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for a place to sit, but every table seemed occupied. For a brief moment she hesitated, unused to not having space made for her. Then her gaze fell on the small table by the window, where the father and daughter sat together in their own little world. Something about the simplicity of the scene pulled her in. She approached slowly, her heels clicking softly against the floor, and stopped beside their table. "Can I sit with you?" she asked, her tone polite, almost tentative. The father looked up, slightly surprised, as if he wasn't used to strangers choosing his company. He glanced at his daughter, who paused her coloring to look at the woman with curious eyes, then back at the empty chair. "Of course," he said kindly, shifting the coloring book to make space. "Thank you," she replied, sitting down gracefully for a moment. There was a quiet pause filled only by the ambient sounds of the cafe. The little girl smiled shyly, and the woman returned it warmly. "That's a beautiful drawing," she said gently. The child's face lit up as she eagerly turned the page to show more. The father chuckled softly, pride evident in his eyes. "She's been practicing every day," he said as the conversation unfolded. The woman found herself unexpectedly at ease. The father spoke simply without exaggeration or complaint, sharing small details about his life, how he balanced work and parenting, how his daughter loved school, how they made the most of what they had. There was no bitterness in his voice, only quiet resilience. She listened intently, drawn not to his struggles, but to the dignity with which he carried them. What struck her most was how present he was. Every time his daughter spoke, he gave her his full attention, as if nothing else in the world mattered. It was a kind of wealth she rarely saw in her own circles. She asked a few gentle questions, careful not to intrude, and he answered with honesty, never realizing who he was speaking to. As sunlight filtered through the window, casting a warm glow over the table, she felt something shift within her. This brief, unexpected encounter was more grounding than any boardroom meeting or high-profile event she had come in looking for a seat, but instead found a quiet reminder of something deeper, something she hadn't realized she'd been missing. The boardroom overlooked the Chicago skyline, its floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting a city that never seemed to slow down. Inside, the atmosphere was polished and precise, filled with quiet confidence. In the soft shuffle of papers, the billionaire sat at the head of the long table, listening as her team presented quarterly updates from the foundation. Numbers charts and success metrics filled the screen, each one representing lives impacted, opportunities created, and futures changed. She had seen countless reports like this before, but she still paid attention, believing every detail mattered. As the presentation shifted to scholarship recipients, a familiar format appeared: names, short summaries, and excerpts from letters sent in gratitude. She scanned the page absent-mindedly at first, until her eyes stopped abruptly on one name. Her expression changed, the composed calm on her face giving way to quiet shock. She leaned forward slightly, reading it again to be certain it was him. The single father from the cafe, the man who had spoken so simply about his life, never once hinting at receiving help, never asking for sympathy. "Pause for a moment," she said, her voice steady but softer than usual. The room fell silent as she focused on the screen. Beneath his name was a scanned letter, one she suddenly recognized. She had read it months ago, maybe even more than once. It spoke about gratitude, about a daughter who loved school, about hope being restored during difficult times. At the time, it had moved her deeply, but it had been just one among many. Now it felt entirely different. Now it had a face, a voice, a presence. She felt a strange mix of emotions: surprise, humility, and something deeper she couldn't quite name. Out of all the people her foundation had helped, she had met one by chance, without knowing, and he had treated her not as someone important, but simply as another person sharing a table. There had been no performance, no attempt to impress, just sincerity. The meeting continued, but her focus had shifted. The numbers no longer felt abstract. Each figure now carried weight, each story a reality she could almost touch. When the session ended, she gathered her things more slowly than usual, her thoughts still lingering on that quiet afternoon in the cafe. She realized she didn't want this moment to pass, like the others later that evening. She returned to the same cafe, hoping, perhaps irrationally, that she might see him again. The place looked just as it had before, warm, familiar, alive with small moments. And then she saw them. The father and his daughter sat by the window once more, the little girl drawing while he watched with the same gentle attention. She approached her steps slower this time, carrying not confidence but a sense of purpose. When he looked up and recognized her, a small smile crossed his face. "Good to see you again," he said. "You too," she replied, her voice softer than before. She sat down, taking a brief moment before speaking again. "There's something I didn't know the last time we met," she began carefully, "and something you didn't know either." He listened, slightly puzzled but attentive. As she explained, revealing her connection to the foundation in the scholarship, his expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. He looked at his daughter, then back at her, as if trying to connect two separate worlds into one. You're the one?" he asked quietly. She nodded, but there was no pride in her expression, only sincerity. "I didn't know it was you," she said. "Not until today." For a moment, words seemed unnecessary. The weight of the revelation settled gently between them. Finally, he spoke, his voice filled with quiet emotion. "You changed our lives," he said. She shook her head slowly, her gaze steady but humble. "No," she replied. "You reminded me why I started." In that simple exchange, something shifted. Not in status or circumstance, but in understanding. The distance between their worlds faded, replaced by a shared sense of humanity that neither wealth nor struggle could define.